Napoleon nearly took over the world, but what if he actually won at Waterloo? We'll cover that wild scenario at the end, so stick around. You've probably heard of Napoleon the Emperor, but before he was storming Europe, he was just Napoleone di Bonaparte, a moody, bookish kid born on a small island called Corsica in 1769. And here's the thing, he hated the French. Because just 1 year before he was born, France invaded Corsica and crushed its short-lived independence. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, switched sides and started working for the French. So, little Napoleon grew up in this weird in-between space, proudly Corsican, but raised in the shadow of the French Empire that conquered his people. He once said, "I was born when Corsica was perishing." That's the kind of drama you get from a future emperor. At age 9, his family shipped him off to mainland France to study at a military academy. Imagine being a Corsican outsider showing up with a thick accent, speaking poor French, and surrounded by kids from rich, noble families. He was bullied, mocked, and isolated. But instead of breaking, he buried himself in books, especially history, strategy, and math. He wasn't the charming class clown. He was the intense kid obsessed with Julius Caesar and military campaigns. One of his instructors even wrote that Napoleon had a profound knowledge of mathematics and a serious and meditative character. In short, he wasn't just smart, he was focused. He knew what he wanted. So, by age 16, he's already a trained artillery officer in the French army. From Corsican outsider to soldier of the very empire that conquered his homeland. That internal tension? It would drive a lot of his choices later on. Napoleon didn't rise through the ranks in some peaceful, boring way. Nope, he rose through chaos, because when the French Revolution exploded in 1789, the entire system he worked for was flipped on its head. The monarchy fell. The nobility lost power. People were getting their heads chopped off by guillotines. It was total instability, but for Napoleon, it was the perfect storm. Here's why. Most of the old aristocratic officers either fled or got executed. That meant vacancies everywhere. If you were smart, loyal to the revolution, and a little ruthless, you could rise fast. And that's exactly what Napoleon did. At one point, he was even arrested for being too close to a radical Jacobin leader. He could have disappeared right there. But luck, or maybe fate, stepped in. His big break came in 1793 at age 24 during the siege of a city called Toulon. The British had taken it, and the French army needed a miracle. Napoleon, then just a junior artillery officer, came up with a bold plan to recapture the port using cannon fire in a way no one else had thought of. Picture him, young, intense, giving precise artillery orders under fire while older generals stood by watching, and it worked. The French won, the British fled, and Napoleon promoted to general at 24. From there, it snowballs. In 1795, royalist forces threatened to overthrow the revolutionary government in Paris. And guess who they called to save the day? Napoleon. Armed with cannons and zero hesitation, he crushed the uprising in the streets. It was brutal, but effective. He literally became known as the guy who saved the revolution with what one politician called a whiff of grape shot. Now, he wasn't just some Corsican outsider anymore. He was a national hero. And more importantly, the government realized this young general wasn't just useful, he was dangerous. So what do? They send him far away, on a little campaign to Italy. And that's where things start to get legendary. So, the French government shipped Napoleon off to Italy, probably thinking, let this hotshot blow off steam somewhere far from Paris. Bad move. Because in just 1 year, Napoleon crushed Austria's armies, outmaneuvered veteran generals, and took over northern Italy with a lightning-fast campaign no one saw coming. He marched with starving, unpaid troops through the Alps, gave rousing speeches, and then beat armies that outnumbered him. He wasn't fighting by the book, he was rewriting the book. speed, surprise, and psychology. He broke coalitions just by how he positioned his forces and talked to local leaders. He told his men, "You are hungry and naked, but rich provinces and great cities will be in your power. Basically, fight hard, and you'll eat well." By 1797, he'd defeated Austria's forces so badly that they begged for peace. He even forced the terms. France gained territory, and Napoleon, he gained mythical status. And just when Europe started getting nervous, he was off again. This time to Egypt? Yeah, Egypt. It sounds random, but there was a strategy. France wanted to mess with British trade routes to India, and Napoleon saw Egypt as the perfect place to strike at Britain's empire without going directly to war with them. So in 1798, he invades. At first, more glory. He won the Battle of the Pyramids, defeating the Mamluks and dazzling Europe again. But then, his luck ran out. The British Navy, under Admiral Nelson, obliterated Napoleon's fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Now he was stranded in Egypt. Supplies were cut off. Troops were dying from disease. The campaign dragged on, and Europe was spiraling into war again. So what did Napoleon do? He just left, secretly. In the middle of the night, he abandoned his army, slipped back into France, and arrived to a hero's welcome, because nobody back home even knew how bad Egypt had gone. But Napoleon wasn't coming back just to bask in glory. France was in chaos again. And now, he had power, popularity, and ambition. The next move? Take over everything. Napoleon's return to France in 1799 wasn't just a homecoming, it was a power play. France was a mess. The revolutionary government, called the Directory, was weak, corrupt, and hated by many. People were tired of endless wars and political chaos. They wanted stability. And guess who had the popularity, the army, and the brains to deliver it? Napoleon. He didn't storm the palace with swords blazing. Nope, he pulled off a coup d'etat, a sudden, smart takeover with political maneuvering, not just brute force. He teamed up with allies in the government and military, marched into Paris, and overthrew the Directory in what's called the 18 Brumaire coup, which basically means November 9th, 1799. Don't worry, you don't have to remember the date, but historians do. From that day, he was first consul, the most powerful man in France. Think of it like a reality show where the quiet, strategic player suddenly flips the game, takes control, and everyone's like, "Whoa, how did he do that?" But Napoleon wasn't just about grabbing power. He had a plan to fix France and make it strong again. He rebuilt the economy, fixed the corrupt legal system by creating the famous Napoleonic Code, a set of laws that still influences many countries today, and restored order without going back to monarchy. He balanced revolution ideals like equality with strong leadership. By 1804, he'd crowned himself Emperor of the French, signaling a new era. Not quite a king, not quite a revolutionary, but something totally new. And with that, the whole of Europe was about to face the storm called Napoleon. Once crowned emperor, Napoleon didn't just want to rule France, he wanted to dominate Europe. Between 1803 and 1815, Europe was basically one big battlefield, and Napoleon was the storm no one could ignore. His secret? Speed and surprise. He moved armies faster than anyone expected, using brilliant tactics to defeat larger coalitions of enemies. Take the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, often called his greatest victory. Imagine this. Outnumbered, facing a combined Russian and Austrian force, Napoleon tricked them by pretending to be weak, then smashed them with a devastating attack that crushed their center. It was so epic, some historians call it the perfect battle. It showed Napoleon wasn't just lucky, he was a tactical genius. After that, he tried to beat Britain economically with the continental system, a blockade meant to cut off British trade. It didn't work as planned, but it showed his ambition to control not just land, but Europe's entire economy. Napoleon crowned family members kings and queens in places like Spain, Naples, and Holland, creating a huge empire with him at the center. But it wasn't all smooth. The Peninsular War in Spain turned into a brutal guerrilla nightmare, draining French resources. And then came the disastrous Russian campaign in 1812. Napoleon marched with over 600,000 troops into Russia, but the Russians used scorched earth tactics, burning everything as they retreated. Winter hit, food ran out, disease spread. By the time Napoleon's army staggered out, barely 100,000 survived. That defeat broke the myth of invincibility. Coalitions formed against him again, and soon Paris was under threat. After the disaster in Russia, Napoleon's empire started to crack, fast. Europe's enemies smelled blood. The Sixth Coalition, a giant alliance including Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and others, pounced. They marched all the way to Paris, and despite fierce fighting, Napoleon was forced to abdicate in April 1814. He was sent to Elba, a tiny island off Italy, with a small guard and a pension, basically a gilded prison. But true to his character, Napoleon didn't accept defeat for long. Within a year, he escaped Elba, landed in France, and started marching toward Paris again. The world held its breath. This was the start of the 100 Days, his final bid for power. Napoleon's return from Elba in 1815 was nothing short of cinematic. He landed on the French coast with just a handful of supporters, yet as he marched toward Paris, thousands of soldiers and citizens switched sides and joined him. People cheered. The king fled, and just like that, Napoleon was back on the throne. But the rest of Europe wasn't having it. The Seventh Coalition quickly formed to crush him once and for all. The final showdown came at Waterloo, Belgium in June 1815. It was a brutal, chaotic battle where British, Dutch, Belgian, and Prussian forces faced Napoleon's army, all. Despite his genius, Napoleon was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The Prussian army arrived just in time to tip the scales. By nightfall, Napoleon's forces were shattered. Waterloo wasn't just a military loss. It marked the end of an era. Napoleon was captured and sent far away to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the rest of his life. But what if he had won at Waterloo? Stick around till the end. We'll dive into exactly that, and imagine how the world could have looked completely different. So, what if Napoleon had actually won at Waterloo? How would Europe and the entire world look different today? Imagine the French Empire expanding beyond what history records, with Napoleon securing his dominance over Europe for years, maybe decades. The Seventh Coalition would collapse, and Britain's influence on the continent would weaken significantly. Napoleon could have enforced the continental system successfully, strangling British trade and possibly reshaping global economics. Napoleon might have redrawn Europe's borders permanently, spreading revolutionary ideals like legal equality and meritocracy, but under his authoritarian rule. His family could have ruled much of Europe, changing royal lineages forever. The Napoleonic Wars affected colonies worldwide. Imagine how an extended empire might have influenced the Americas, Africa, or Asia. Could Napoleon's dominance have delayed or altered the Industrial Revolution or nationalist movements like German unification? Napoleon was a patron of the arts and sciences. Would an extended reign boost or stifle progress? Would the French language and culture have spread even more? It's impossible to say for sure, but one thing's certain: history would be unrecognizable. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Napoleon's rise and fall and the epic what if, hit like and subscribe for more history stories you'll love.